never thought I would find myself in a situation like this. You go through life thinking that the worst betrayals happen to other people, that your marriage is solid, that your partner would never do something so cruel. But here I am, sitting alone in an apartment that used to feel like home, staring at my phone, my hands still shaking from what I overheard just a few hours ago. My wife, Jessica, and I have been married for 6 years. 6 years of what I thought was a good marriage, not perfect but real. We had built a life together, made plans, shared struggles, and celebrated victories. I had trusted her completely, had never once questioned whether she was being honest with me. Now, after what I heard in that park today, I realized that I have been living in a lie for months, maybe longer. I don't even know if I have ever truly known her at all. The cracks had been there for a while, but I ignored them, brushing them off as normal ups and downs. Jessica had always been independent, always had her own thing going on, and I respected that. But at some point, things started to shift. She became more secretive with her phone, always tilting it away from me, leaving the room when she took calls, texting with a guarded look on her face. I noticed it, of course. How could I not? But when I asked about it, she acted like I was crazy for even bringing it up, rolling her eyes and making me feel like I was paranoid. "It's just work," she would say. Or, "It's Megan, we're planning a trip. Don't be so nosy." And because I wanted to believe her, because I didn't want to be that guy, the insecure, suspicious husband, I let it go. I convinced myself that I was overthinking things, that I was being too sensitive. Then there were the last-minute weekend trips. At first, it was just an occasional night out with friends, but soon, it turned into entire weekends away. Always some excuse. Megan invited me to a spa weekend, or I have a work retreat, it's mandatory. The details never quite lined up, but she was good at dodging my questions. If I pushed too much, she would snap at me, making me feel like I was smothering her. I didn't want to be the possessive husband, the one who checked up on her every move, so I backed off. I wanted her to have her freedom, to enjoy her life. I told myself that trust meant giving her space, that I shouldn't read too much into things. But deep down, something was gnawing at me, an uneasy feeling that I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. Then there was the way she treated me. The little things that used to make our marriage feel warm and easy had disappeared. She stopped asking me how my day was, stopped really listening when I talked. She used to touch me absent-mindedly, her hand on my arm as she walked past, fingers brushing mine when we sat next to each other. But that had faded too. When I tried to bring it up, she would get defensive, accusing me of being needy or saying I was imagining things. The distance between us grew, and I kept waiting for things to get back to normal. I told myself we were just going through a rough patch, that every couple had ups and downs. I just needed to be patient, give her time. But time didn't fix anything. If anything, it only made things worse. And then today happened. A random Sunday afternoon. A simple walk in the park, and my entire life changed in an instant. I wasn't even supposed to be there. I had planned to stay home, maybe catch up on work, but my friend Mark convinced me to get out for some fresh air. We grabbed coffee and headed to the park near our apartment. The same park where Jessica and I used to go all the time. I hadn't been there in months, not since she started pulling away. And then, just as we were about to leave, I heard her voice. I knew it instantly. I could pick her voice out of a crowded room. And there she was, standing just a few feet away, leaning against a bench, phone pressed to her ear. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was on a call with her sister or Megan or a coworker. But then I heard the way she was talking, the softness in her voice, the laughter, the way she lowered her tone like she was sharing a secret. And then the words that changed everything. "This weekend was amazing. I hate coming back to real life. I just want to be with you all the time." Felt like the ground beneath me cracked open. My stomach twisted. My hands went cold. And suddenly, the world around me blurred into nothing but those words. "This weekend was amazing. I just want to be with you all the time." It was all there in just a few sentences, the truth, the betrayal, the months of lying. She hadn't been on a spa trip. She hadn't been at a work retreat. She had been with someone else, somewhere else, living a life that didn't include me. My ears started ringing, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Couldn't do anything but stand there, listening as my wife gushed about another man like I didn't exist. She was still talking, still laughing, still lost in her fantasy, completely unaware that I was standing there, my entire world crumbling around me. I wanted to walk up to her, grab the phone out of her hand, demand that she explain herself, force her to tell me how long this had been going on. But I didn't. Because I needed to know more. I needed to understand just how deep this went before I let her see that I had found out. So instead, I turned and walked away, my heart hammering in my chest, my mind racing with questions I wasn't ready to face. I don't know what happens next. I don't know how I'm supposed to go home and look at her without screaming. I don't know how I'm going to confront her without completely losing it. All I know is that my marriage is over whether she knows it yet or not. And the worst part? I still don't know if I want to hear the truth from her, or if I'd rather never hear another word come out of her mouth again. I don't remember much of the walk home after I left the park. My body was moving, my legs carrying me forward, but my mind was stuck in that moment, replaying Jessica's words over and over again like a song I couldn't turn off. I felt sick, like something inside me had cracked wide open, leaving nothing but raw, exposed nerves. I had known something was wrong for months, but hearing her say it so effortlessly, with no hesitation, no guilt in her voice, made it real in a way that I hadn't been prepared for. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It wasn't paranoia. It was fact. My wife had been sneaking off with another man for months, lying to my face every time she packed a bag, every time she made up some excuse, every time she looked me in the eye and told me she loved me. And now I had to figure out just how deep this betrayal went. By the time I reached our apartment, my hands were shaking so badly that I had to take a few minutes to compose myself before going inside. Jessica wasn't home yet, which gave me time to think, time to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the blank screen of my phone, feeling like I was caught in some kind of nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I had always imagined that if something like this ever happened to me, I would know exactly what to do. I would confront her, demand answers, throw her out, pack my bags, something. But now that I was here, in the middle of it, my brain felt scrambled, my emotions tangled in knots I couldn't undo. I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. Not just the words I had overheard, not just the gut feeling that had been gnawing at me for months. I needed something concrete, something that she couldn't lie her way out of when I confronted her. Because I already knew how this would go if I didn't have it. She would twist it, make me question myself, act like I was crazy for accusing her of something so awful. She had done it before, every time I had even hinted at my suspicions. She was good at it too, so good that I had spent months doubting my own instincts, convincing myself that I was just imagining things. But not this time. This time, I was going to make sure she couldn't gaslight her way out of it. I started with her phone. It was the one thing she never let out of her sight, the thing that she always seemed to clutch a little too tightly whenever I walked into the room. She had a password on it, of course, one she had changed at some point without telling me, but I had seen her type it in enough times to take a guess. On the third try, I was in. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears as I scrolled through her messages, half hoping I wouldn't find anything, even though I already knew what was there. It didn't take long. I didn't even have to dig. There it was, long, detailed conversations with someone named D. I opened the messages, my stomach twisting as I read through them. There were dozens, hundreds. Flirty exchanges, inside jokes I didn't understand, references to places I had never been. Mentions of weekend trips, plans to meet up, complaints about how hard it was for them to find time together. The way she talked to him was different, so different from the way she talked to me now. There was excitement in her words, a playfulness I hadn't seen in months, maybe longer. She missed him. She longed for him. She was counting down the days until she could see him again. And me? I wasn't even a factor in the equation. She never mentioned me, not once. It was like I didn't exist, like I was just some shadow in the background of her real life. Then I found the pictures. Some were innocent enough at first, selfies, pictures of meals at restaurants, snapshots of expensive hotel rooms. But then there were the ones that made my vision blur, my fingers tightening around the phone so hard that I thought I might crush it. Pictures of them together, standing too close, looking too comfortable, too familiar. A shot of her leaning into him at a bar, her head tilted back in laughter. Another of them on a balcony, wine glasses in hand, the city lights glowing behind them. And then, the one that shattered the last bit of denial I had left. A photo of them in bed, her head resting on his chest, his arm wrapped around her like she belonged to him. I set the phone down, staring at the table, my breath coming in shallow gasps. It felt like my entire body had gone numb, like my brain was trying to shut down to protect me from what I had just seen. I had spent months wondering if I was imagining things, if I was reading too much into her behavior. And now, here was the truth, laid out in undeniable detail. Jessica hadn't just been sneaking around. She had built an entire life with someone else, a life where I was nothing more than a distant inconvenience. For a long time, I just sat there, trying to process it, trying to figure out what to do next. I thought about calling her, demanding that she come home and explain herself, but what was the point? She had already told me everything in those messages, in those pictures. There was no explanation that would make it better. There was no excuse that would change what she had done. And yet, a part of me still wanted to hear her say it, to look me in the eye and admit that she had thrown our marriage away for some guy I had never even heard of. Eventually, I put the phone back where I found it, my hands still shaking. I knew that once I confronted her, there would be no going back. Everything would change, and as much as I wanted answers, I wasn't ready yet. I needed time. I needed to figure out what I was going to say, how I was going to handle it. Because no matter what happened next, one thing was clear. My marriage was over. I just had to decide how I was going to let it end. The night Jessica came home, I was sitting in the living room, staring at the blank television screen, my mind running through every possible way this could go. I had replayed the moment 100 times in my head, imagined the different ways she might react. Denial, anger, crocodile tears. I knew she would try to manipulate the situation, spin it in a way that made me question what I knew. But this time, she wouldn't be able to gaslight me. I had the messages. I had the pictures. I had heard her own words in the park. There was no escape for her now, no excuse she could make that would undo what she had done. And yet, even with all the evidence, I could feel the knot of dread tightening in my stomach. No matter how much I prepared myself, I wasn't ready to see her lie to my face. When she walked through the door, she didn't even look at me at first. She kicked off her shoes, checked her phone, and muttered some half-hearted greeting, already distracted. That alone made my blood boil. How easy it was for her to walk into this house like nothing had changed, like she hadn't spent the weekend wrapped up in another man's arms. I watched her, waiting, studying her face, looking for any sign of guilt, but there was nothing. She seemed relaxed, indifferent, almost bored. It was like she had no idea that I had already uncovered everything. Maybe she truly believed I was too blind, too trusting, too naive to ever suspect her. I didn't waste time. I pulled out my phone, opened the messages, and slid it across the table toward her. I didn't say a word. I just watched as she picked it up, her expression shifting from casual annoyance to something else, something sharp and calculating. She didn't gasp. She didn't break down. She just stared at the screen for a long moment, her jaw tightening, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then, slowly, she exhaled and set the phone down like it was nothing, like it wasn't proof of her months-long betrayal, like it wasn't the reason our marriage was about to implode. I could already see it happening, the way she was preparing to deflect, to twist this into something she could control. And just like that, the lies started. She claimed the messages didn't mean anything, that I was reading too much into them. She said Dee was just a friend, that I was making this bigger than it needed to be. But when I mentioned the pictures, when I told her I had seen the one of them in bed together, she shifted tactics. The fake innocence turned into irritation, then anger. She accused me of invading her privacy, as if that was the real betrayal here. She said if I had trusted her, I wouldn't have gone through her phone. The audacity of it made my skin crawl. I had just caught her, red-handed, and somehow, she still had the nerve to act like I was the one in the wrong. She threw out excuse after excuse, each one more pathetic than the last. She told me that things had been tough between us, that she had felt lonely, that she hadn't meant for it to happen. She tried to make it sound like some kind of mistake, like she had just stumbled into this affair by accident, like it wasn't something she had planned, nurtured, and carefully hidden for months. I could feel my hands clenching into fists as I listened, my jaw aching from how hard I was grinding my teeth. Every word out of her mouth was another slap in the face, another reminder of just how little she respected me. But then, the worst part, the part that nearly pushed me over the edge. When she realized I wasn't buying her excuses, she switched gears completely. She laughed. Actually laughed. A small, dry chuckle as she leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms, looking at me like I was some kind of idiot for being so upset. And then she said it, the sentence that would stay with me for the rest of my life. Did you really think I was going to spend the rest of my life with just you? That was it. That was the moment I knew there was no saving this. Not that there had ever been a chance, but part of me had still been holding onto something, some thread of hope that maybe she would show remorse, that maybe there would be some part of her that still cared. But there was nothing. No guilt, no sadness, not even a flicker of hesitation. Just cold, calculated detachment, as if she had already written me off, as if I had been nothing more than a stepping stone on her way to something better. I don't even remember what I said after that. I know my voice was shaking, not from sadness, but from rage. I know I told her I was done, that there was no coming back from this, that I wanted her out of my life. She barely reacted, just shrugged and said she needed time to figure things out. Like this was some minor inconvenience, like I was supposed to wait around while she decided if she still wanted to keep me as her backup plan. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. I grabbed my keys, walked out the door, and just drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to be anywhere but there. I needed to put distance between myself and the woman who had spent months lying to my face, who had just admitted, without a trace of regret, that she had never planned on being faithful to me. The woman who had laughed at my pain, who had mocked the very foundation of the marriage I had fought to keep alive. As I drove, my mind kept going back to that moment in the park. That perfect, cruel moment where the universe had decided to pull the curtain back and show me the truth. If I hadn't been there that day, if I hadn't overheard that phone call, how much longer would she have kept this up? How much more time would I have wasted believing in a marriage that had died long before I even realized it was sick? I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't know what came next, what the legal process would look like, how I was going to start over from scratch. But I knew one thing for certain, this was the end. And I would never ever let her talk her way out of it. The drive that night felt endless, the road stretching out before me like some dark abyss I had no choice but to travel. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, my thoughts racing so fast that I couldn't focus on anything but the sheer, crushing weight of what had just happened. I kept replaying it over and over, the cold way she looked at me, the mocking way she had laughed, the way she had made it seem like I was nothing more than some placeholder in her life, a fool who had served his purpose until she found something better. Every word, every moment of that conversation burned into my memory like a scar I knew I would carry forever. And yet, no matter how much I tried to make sense of it, no matter how many times I turned it over in my mind, I couldn't understand how someone could be so callous, so utterly indifferent to the destruction they had caused. For the longest time I had believed in us. I had believed in our marriage, in the idea that love was something you fought for, something you worked through even when things got hard. I had never been naive enough to think that relationships were easy, but I had always thought that if you truly loved someone, if you respected them, you didn't betray them like this. You didn't lie to their face for months. You didn't mock their pain when you got caught. You didn't act like their entire existence in your life was some kind of joke. And yet, Jessica had done all of those things without hesitation, without remorse, and it shattered something inside me in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the realization that I had been in love with an illusion. The woman I had married, the woman I had trusted, had never truly existed. She had been a mask, a carefully constructed facade that hid the truth of who she really was. And now, that mask had slipped, revealing a stranger who had never truly valued me, who had never once seen me as anything more than an obligation she had outgrown. I pulled into an empty parking lot, my chest so tight that I could barely breathe, my hands shaking as I let go of the wheel and ran them over my face, trying to ground myself in something, anything that felt real. But nothing did. Everything I had known, everything I had believed about my marriage, had been a lie. And now I had to live with the fact that while I had spent months trying to be a good husband, trying to make things work, trying to understand what was going wrong, she had been off with another man, living a separate life that had nothing to do with me. I had been nothing more than a safety net, a backup plan she could fall back on whenever she needed stability but never love. And yet, despite all of it, despite knowing the kind of person she was now, the pain didn't just vanish. The anger was there, sure, boiling beneath the surface like a wildfire ready to consume everything in its path, but beneath that there was something worse, grief. A deep, aching grief that settled in my bones, that made me feel like I was mourning someone who had died even though she was still very much alive. I missed her. Or rather, I missed the version of her that I thought was real. The one who used to look at me like I was the most important person in the world, the one who used to curl up next to me on the couch after a long day, the one who used to tell me she couldn't imagine her life without me. That version of her was gone, erased by the woman who had laughed in my face when I confronted her, the woman who had looked me dead in the eye and admitted that she had never planned on staying faithful. And I hated that I still felt that pull, that instinct to reach for someone who had already let me go long before I even realized it. The sadness came in waves, hitting me out of nowhere when I least expected it. One moment, I would be numb, staring blankly at the walls of my apartment, and the next, I would be flooded with memories, with moments that once felt happy but now felt like cruel reminders of what had been taken from me. I hated myself for it. I hated that she still had that power over me, that even after everything she had done, she could still make me feel like I had lost something worth mourning. Because the truth was, I hadn't. I had lost her, yes. But had I really lost anything worth holding on to? The woman who had done this to me, who had treated me like a joke, like an afterthought, like a man she had never truly loved, was she really someone to grieve? Or was I just clinging to a memory that had never been real in the first place? The realization that I would never get closure, never get a real apology, never get any true remorse from her, hit me harder than anything else. I knew how this would go. She would move on without a second thought, slip into a new life with her new man, and never look back. She wouldn't sit in the dark, questioning everything, feeling like her world had fallen apart. No, that was reserved for me. I was the one who had to pick up the pieces of a life I thought was real while she walked away without a scratch. And that was the hardest part to accept. The unfairness of it. The imbalance of it. The way I was drowning in something she had caused while she didn't even seem to care that she had set the fire in the first place. But as the days passed, something inside me began to shift. The sadness was still there, the anger still burned, but beneath it something new was growing, resolve. I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't make her regret what she had done, couldn't force her to feel the pain she had inflicted on me. But I could take back control of my own life. I could make sure that this betrayal didn't define me, that I didn't let it turn me into someone bitter and broken. She had already taken so much from me, my trust, my faith in our marriage, my belief in the person I thought she was. But I refused to let her take my future, too. I didn't know exactly what came next, but I knew this. I wasn't going to be the man she had left behind, sitting in misery while she went on with her life. I was going to move forward no matter how much it hurt, no matter how long it took. Because at the end of the day, she was the one who had lost something real. And someday, whether it was weeks or months or years from now, she would look back and realize it. But by then I would be long gone. And that, more than anything, was the only justice I needed. As the days stretched on, I found myself teetering between two extremes, anger so fierce it felt like it would consume me, and a hollow sadness that made even the simplest tasks feel impossible. Every morning, I woke up to an eerie silence, the weight of an empty space beside me acting as a constant reminder of everything I had lost. Except, had I really lost anything of value? That was the thought that started creeping in, slowly at first, then louder, drowning out the grief that had kept me shackled. Jessica had betrayed me in ways I never imagined possible, had tossed aside our marriage like it was nothing more than a burden she had been waiting to rid herself of. And yet, I had been sitting in that grief, stewing in it, letting it take up space in my life like she still mattered, like she still had any control over me. But why? Why was I mourning someone who had laughed in my face when I confronted her, who had made it clear that she had never even planned to stay faithful? She wasn't suffering, she wasn't losing sleep over me. So why the hell should I let her dictate my life any longer? That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I wasn't going to let Jessica be the last thought in my mind before I fell asleep or the first thing I thought of when I woke up. I wasn't going to sit in the ruins of our marriage waiting for some kind of justice that would never come. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. I was done. I was done trying to make sense of her actions, done trying to figure out why she had done it, done wondering if she ever loved me at all. It didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered now was what I did with the time that was still mine. I couldn't change the past, couldn't rewrite the last 6 years, couldn't undo the pain she had caused. But I could choose how I moved forward, and I refused to let her betrayal define me any longer. The first step was cutting her out completely. There was no reason to drag this out, no reason to sit through any more of her excuses, her attempts at justifying what she had done. She had already made it clear that she didn't respect me, so why should I keep giving her the courtesy of my time? I contacted a lawyer the next day, laying everything out, making it clear that I wanted the process to move as quickly as possible. I didn't want negotiations, didn't want back and forths, didn't want drawn-out fights over who got what. She could have whatever she wanted as long as it got her out of my life faster. I didn't want her home. Every room was tainted with memories I no longer wanted to hold onto, reminders of the life I had been living while she had been sneaking around behind my back. I wasn't interested in keeping pieces of something that had already been shattered beyond repair. Let her have it. Let her sit in the space we once shared, surrounded by the ghost of what she destroyed. It wouldn't be my problem anymore. When I finally told Jessica that I wanted a divorce, her reaction was exactly what I expected: bored indifference. She didn't fight it, didn't beg me to reconsider. She shrugged, told me she had been meaning to bring it up anyway, as if our marriage had been some casual arrangement she had outgrown rather than the life we had built together. I felt nothing. Not anger, not pain, not even disappointment. Just relief. Relief that I no longer had to pretend, that I no longer had to share my space with someone who had never truly been mine. She could have her new life, her new man, her expensive hotels and secret weekends. Whatever happiness she thought she had found, she could keep it. I didn't care anymore. The hardest part wasn't leaving her, it was leaving the version of myself that had once believed in her. The man who had trusted her without hesitation, who had thought they were building something real together. I had to let go of that version of myself, the one who had spent months trying to fix something that was already broken, the one who had doubted his own instincts while she was off lying to his face. That part of me was gone, burned away by the truth, and in its place was something different. Stronger, maybe? Or maybe just wiser. I had learned the hardest lesson of all: some people will hurt you without a second thought, not because you did anything wrong, but because it's simply who they are. Jessica hadn't cheated because I lacked something. She had cheated because she wanted to. And no amount of love, no amount of effort, no amount of devotion would have changed that. In the weeks following her departure, I started rebuilding not just my life but myself. I cut ties with mutual friends who had known about the affair and said nothing, unwilling to surround myself with people who had stood by while I was being humiliated. I reconnected with people I had neglected during my marriage, friends I had unintentionally pushed aside while I had been too focused on making things work with Jessica. I threw myself into hobbies I had abandoned, rediscovered parts of myself that had been buried beneath the weight of a failing marriage. It wasn't an immediate fix. There were still bad days, moments where the pain resurfaced like a dull ache that refused to fully disappear. But slowly, I started feeling lighter. Jessica didn't matter anymore. What she had done, what she was doing now, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was that I was free. Free from the lies, from the weight of a marriage that had never been what I thought it was, free to start over on my own terms. I had spent so much time trying to hold onto something that wasn't real, trying to fix something that was meant to fall apart. Now, I was finally letting go. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe again. In the months that followed, I realized that healing from betrayal isn't a straight path. It's messy, unpredictable, and full of setbacks. Some days, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I had shed a weight I hadn't even realized I had been carrying. Other days, I felt like I was walking through a fog, haunted by the echoes of conversations, of laughter that had once felt real but now only served as reminders of how deeply I had been deceived. There were moments when I woke up and reached for someone who wasn't there, only to be hit by the sharp reminder that she had never really been there to begin with, not in the way I had thought. I had spent so much time believing in the idea of Jessica, in the version of her that I had built up in my mind, that it took me a long time to separate the person I had loved from the person she truly was. And maybe that was the hardest part, realizing that I hadn't just lost a wife, I had lost an illusion. But the truth is, as painful as it was, I was better for it. There was something liberating about being forced to start over, about being given a clean slate. At first, the silence of my new life had been deafening, the empty spaces she had left behind feeling like wounds that refused to close. But over time, that silence became something else. It became peace. I didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore, didn't have to question whether I was imagining things, didn't have to convince myself that I was overthinking when, deep down, I had known all along that something was wrong. I didn't have to wonder if my wife was lying to me, because my life was finally free of lies. I was no longer second-guessing every conversation, no longer trying to decode the meaning behind every late-night text or sudden weekend trip. There was no more paranoia, no more gut-wrenching uncertainty. Just the simple, unshakable truth that I was free. I stopped checking her social media. I stopped caring whether she was still with him, whether she had moved on, or whether she would ever regret what she had done. I knew, deep down, that she probably wouldn't. People like Jessica don't feel remorse the way normal people do. They don't sit alone at night, replaying their mistakes, wondering what they could have done differently. They just move on, replacing one distraction with another, convinced that the problem was never them. And that's what made me realize that I had spent too much time hoping for something that would never come. I didn't need her to feel sorry. I didn't need her to realize what she had lost. The only thing I needed was to move on without her, without carrying the weight of her choices on my shoulders. For a long time I had thought of our marriage as something that had been stolen from me. I had seen myself as the victim of her deceit, the man left in the wreckage of a life he had spent years building. But the further I got from it, the more I realized that I had been given a gift, one that I never would have chosen for myself, but a gift nonetheless. Because if Jessica hadn't done what she did, if I hadn't overheard that phone call in the park, I might have spent years, maybe even the rest of my life, trapped in a marriage that was built on lies. I might have continued being blind to who she really was, might have wasted even more time trying to fix something that had never been whole to begin with. I might have kept sacrificing pieces of myself for a woman who had never truly valued me. And that was the thought that finally set me free. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that trust is everything. Not just trust in a partner, but trust in yourself. Looking back, I see all the moments where my gut had tried to warn me, all the times when something had felt off, when my instincts had screamed that something wasn't right. And every time I had ignored it, convincing myself that I was imagining things, that Jessica loved me and would never do something like that. But instincts don't lie. People do. And if I could go back and tell my past self anything, it would be this: listen to your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let someone else make you feel crazy for questioning their behavior. Don't let love blind you to the truth. And most importantly, don't waste your time on someone who doesn't choose you. Because love should be simple. Love should be honest. Love should never make you feel like you have to fight for someone's attention, for their loyalty, for their respect. If you ever find yourself in a relationship where you are constantly questioning whether or not you are enough, then the truth is, you're with the wrong person. I don't know what the future holds for me, but for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with that. I'm not in a rush to fill the empty spaces, not looking for someone to distract me from the hurt. I'm taking my time, learning who I am outside of the title of husband, rediscovering the parts of myself that I had set aside while trying to be everything Jessica needed. And maybe that's the silver lining in all of this, realizing that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is actually the best thing. Because I'm no longer trapped in a marriage with a woman who never really loved me. I'm no longer living under the weight of her lies. I'm no longer waiting for her to change. Jessica was my past, but she won't be my future. I may not know exactly where I'm headed, but at least I know this: I will never settle for anything less than what I deserve again. And that is the one thing she will never take from me.